I'm going to sit over here. Am I lined up? No.
Yeah.
We're supposed to be there. Oh. But it doesn't matter. We can sit in whatever order we like.
I'll come and sit next to you.
Did you want to?
So welcome everyone, welcome panel to this session on how to prepare your workforce for the new realities. Work's changing faster than ever in response to new needs and new demands, and there are social, economic and ethical imperatives to make sure that it works for everyone. And this means bringing your workforce with you, and it means preparing your workforce for the new realities that we're facing. So we're looking at faster and more pervasive adoption of digital technologies and automation, although it's happening in a really uneven way with very uneven outcomes. It's irregular, and it's bringing profound changes to the world of work, to business models, to ethos, to practice, to what we all expect from work too, which might explain the extent of the skills mismatches that we're seeing across the UK, and the data released from ONS this week shows that they're higher than ever vacancies, 1,300,000. So against that background, I'm going to introduce my amazing panel. Charlie needs no introduction as the founder of CEO, a co-founder of CEO and the of CogX, and twice World Economic Forum technology pioneer. Octavius Black is a British entrepreneur, philanthropist and author who founded the world's first and leading behavioural science business, MindGym, and you've heard from him this morning about that. He's also a generous philanthropist, and with his wife Joanne co-founded the social mobility programme Parent Gym in 2009. And Jeffrey Rayport teaches entrepreneurial management at Harvard Business School. He was professor at Harvard Business School for nearly a decade, and whilst there he developed the first graduate e-commerce course, and his course spawned many startups, including Yahoo. And among other things, he coined the term viral marketing. Sara Zannone is head of research at Holistic AI, focusing on AI ethics, and previously worked as a research scientist at DeepMind, so we can ask her all our technical questions. She has a PhD in computational neuroscience from Imperial College and has investigated the biological and artificial reinforcement learning. We're going to start off by everybody opening for 1 or 2 minutes on what they think the new realities hold, move into questions which I'll kick off, and then go to questions from the audience. Charlie.
And I was going to say, you should kick off.
Yes,
Tell us about the Institute for the Future of Work.
Yeah, the Institute for the Future of Work is a research and development institute, a charitable foundation, co-founded by myself with a Nobel Prize winner, Sir Chris Pisarides, and a technologist, Naomi Clymer, just in the nick of time before COVID. And our charitable mission is to build a fairer future through better work. Charlie, the floor is yours.
Brilliant. But look, and it's so great to have you here, and thank you for chairing the session. CogX, our perspective on this is pretty well known at the festival. We passionately believe in addressing this question, how do we get the next 10 years right? I certainly hope we're all around for a lot longer than 10 years, but it seems like that includes the current year and the 9 after it. But, the pace of change just continues to accelerate. I think we all feel that. The ability to process and use information quickly, all of us individually, seems to continue to accelerate. As you said, our education and the tools to be able to do that vary enormously, depending where you come from and what privilege you've had and the background you've had and which country you grew up in. And I think when we just bring it back to the macro, the best and the only way we're going to address that question and be successful in getting the next 10 years right is by making sure as many people as possible have the skills to be successful and contribute as possible. And that's one of the reasons why we do this event, and we subsidize so many tickets to it. I mean, there's many people here who won't have paid to be here because they were either gifted a ticket by a sponsor or a partner or by CogX, because we need to be as inclusive as possible and allowing great experts to share their insights. And it's also why we developed an app. The CogX app is, again, a free platform that aggregates content from 3,000 different thought leadership organizations. And we're about to launch moderated communities on all the different topics from the festival so that we can continue that learning and engagement all year round. I think when it comes to, or the rest of the panel have all got different perspectives on this, which is brilliant. But when it comes to timing, I remember in 2017 opened up the festival with a discussion about the state of AI. And I asked the experts on the panel, how long is it going to be before, one, that we have autonomous cars on the road, and two, we have general intelligence? And this is something that gets debated a lot. And of course, there's the discussion about superintelligence or the supernova or the singularity. And at the time, in 2017, seems like it was a long time ago, it was 3 to 5 years before truck drivers would lose their job. And that's obviously the most populous job in the whole of America. So that was a cause of concern. And people were kind of 5 to 10 years for general intelligence. I would say we've failed on the first prediction. And I won't mention the panelists. But there are people who think that could happen any day now. I mean, obviously, Elon leads that pack. But there are others who are demonstrating incredible technology. And the second one, general intelligence, unless it's been completely hidden from it, I think we don't know how far away that is. Very, very hard to predict. Certainly, we've missed the 5-year mark. So I think on the positive side of things are moving fast, but some things we thought were going to happen really quickly that would completely change the world of work, right, haven't happened. On the flip side, they could happen tomorrow. And the pace that these things can emerge can be incredibly fast. And we had a presentation yesterday from Jack Hidary, who's just spun out from Google X, or X as it's now called, and Alphabet, a company called AQ Sandbox, AI Quantum Sandbox, with Eric Schmidt as the chair, where they're now applying quantum to AI to do things even faster and at the atomic level. So things are happening in a big way still. Maybe the hype around the timing of those things happening has changed. But I think we all need to be aware that we need to put the time in now to get ready and make sure we're ready to adapt to those changes and be ready for them, and to level the playing field, right? And make sure that it's evenly distributed as much as we can.
Super interesting. So the era of worrying about just job displacement now has gone. We've moved on, and we're finding more and more complex forms of automation with impacts, significant impacts on access to work, on terms and conditions of work, on quality of work, and on equality. So, Sara, do tell us about what we can, perhaps what we can do, the new realities, if we don't pay more attention to equality and inclusivity as we go.
Yes, so there has been quite some work, talking about like AI, I guess, and automation in the context of work. And I'm a head of research at Holistic AI. What we do in our company is essentially our mission is to solve the problem of trust in AI. And what we mean by that is the fact that like AI is become more and more used and widespread across a series of applications, really, but like a lot of it really in the workplace as well. We have done quite a lot of work in the context of recruitment in particular, and there are many concerns around this. So as it becomes more widespread, obviously, there are like issues around equality, for example. There have been quite a few high-profile cases where there were issues around the recruitment and like biases and unfairness in the recruitment space. So what we do essentially is what we call like AI assurance or AI audits. And so a company comes to us if they use an AI system. So in the case of recruitment, it could be that they have an algorithm that allows, that decides whether someone can be hired or not, or there could be ranking CVs. These are just some examples. And what we do essentially is we receive this system and we perform a series of like technical assessment. We come up with some suggestion, like a risk scoring of like what are the main areas of risk. And actually unfairness and bias is only one of the areas of risk. There are others that we could talk about. And then we come up with like a series of suggestions and mitigation strategies that they could implement, and then with the view in the long term of essentially kind of mitigating the risks around using AI. And yeah, I think like there is the way that AI has been used in the workplace is super interesting. Recruitment is only one aspect. There have been loads around monitoring as well, and there's been a lot of regulation coming up in general, in the area of AI and AI ethics, there has been lots of regulation. And I think, Charlie, you mentioned about superintelligence and general artificial intelligence, and that's only one of the aspects, right? Because we already have AI right now. So in AI ethics, there are always these two currents, one that is more concerned about the long term, and one that is more concerned about, like, but how are we using it right now? So this is definitely one of the topics we're looking at.
Fantastic, thank you. So we know what the future could look like, we know what the risks are, opportunities and inclusivity. How are the realities of this new world looking for you, Jeffrey?
Well, thank you. First of all, it's just a real pleasure to be here with all of you and with these wonderful panelists. I did want to say that, we're talking about artificial general intelligence and whether it's arrived or not. And I know that there's a former Google engineer, who was fired 3 or 4 days ago.
Yeah.
Because he actually thinks a sentient AI has arrived, is a life form of some form, Project Lambda. So it is an interesting thing we should talk about, is this actually on the horizon line, or are we here and maybe to some extent in denial?
What are we actually preparing for?
I think absolutely. So I represent the education sector on this panel as a faculty member at Harvard Business School, and I was reflecting on the tagline of this conference about the next 10 years, Charlie, and thinking, our mantra or our mission at the school is to train our students to become leaders who will make a difference in the world. And I've always worried about that because we say make a difference as opposed to making a positive difference. And given the reputation of MBA students, you might actually think that it's an entirely negative thing. So it's implied positive. But this interesting question then, assuming that it is a positive difference and a positive impact, as to how you train younger people. These are not obviously kids, they're people in their mid to late 20s, age of some of you in the audience. And for us, this comes down to the question of what do you actually need to teach a person going into the workforce about the future of work? What do they actually need to be able to bring into the workforce? And I guess just two quick things to say about that. I mean, one is that we have just celebrated our 100th anniversary of teaching by the case method at Harvard Business School, which is sort of odd because you'd think if we're training people for the future, how come we're using a pedagogical technique that is literally 100 years old? And the original case study at Harvard Business School was about a shoe company, and it was 101 years old. So it took us a year to figure out what to do with the case after we wrote it for the first time a century ago. And what I think continues to give us faith in this is that the case method is obviously not about rote learning. To some extent, it's about knowledge acquisition, but it is actually about dealing with change. It's about perpetual intellectual challenges, continuous learning, problem solving. It's essentially putting students into what I think of as a kind of flight simulator for organizational life. Our classrooms, where they have a discussion among 90 students to try to figure something out that is obviously business related and organizational. I think for us, the interesting question is the flight simulator itself, meaning a classroom, a group like this, having a big group discussion, is that in itself something that needs a technology upgrade? And in two ways. One is, if it's a simulator, could we be using some version of VR or mixed reality informed by AI, actually to run more effective simulations than reading a 24-page document of just ink on a page, or digitally delivered? And the second thing is that, are we actually training our students through these discussions to deal with what I've spent a good deal of time studying as a researcher, is this whole question of we are training people to go into the world to take action, but that kind of implies that they're going to be taking action with a bunch of people in an organization. And we're now entering a world where people are working side by side with technology. I mean, in the most sophisticated forms, it's AI living in a network with whom or with they are collaborating. I should say, in honor of the Google engineer, the former engineer, with whom, as if you imagine these sentient AIs are sort of living beings of some kind. But in the more primitive versions, the sales rep walking around with an iPad, the person who is behind a counter as people do order entry on a touchscreen display, the airline people who are dealing with biometrics, but they're standing by to provide the human touch. That raises this really interesting set of questions, which is when we talk about businesses and business organizations, what does the quote-unquote talent even look like when, at least from our view, it's essentially three types of labor. One is pure human labor that we've known for hundreds, thousands of years, face-to-face human labor. Then there's the technology labor when you walk up to an automated teller machine, an ATM, or a web screen, where it's pure technology serving a human being. But then, and let me end with this, which is what are we doing about the most complex of those, which is this hybrid? People working with technology, technology working with people, and how does that then become the new complex organizational reality that we've got to grapple with. So I'm sorry, that was typically long-winded of an academic. So forgive me, I've probably taken a lot of quota for the entire panel.
I wouldn't have missed a minute. But a perfect opening for you, Octavius. And so pulling those together and how thinking about how we can achieve positive outcomes across your workforce for as many people as possible. What do the new realities hold for you?
It's a treat to be on this panel, and I love the fact you brought us all together, Charlie. It's a fantastic conversation to think about what's needed to set us up for the next 10 years. And I run a psychology business called MindGym, and so we're interested in the challenges that, many of the biggest challenges that face society today. 50 years ago, it was probably famine or pestilence or even warfare. Now, whilst those still exist, it's much more mental health or loneliness or relationships or exclusion or bullying or whatever else it might happen to be. These are basically psychological issues. So I come from this from a psychological perspective. And for me, there's one meta skill, one meta requirement that sits above everything else that will set us up for the future. And that is our ability and enthusiasm and capacity to learn. Now, I say that born out of some good evidence. There's a really good research that you think you want, if you're very unwell, you want to go see a rather experienced doctor. But actually what you find is doctors' knowledge peaks somewhere between just graduating and 10 years. And after that, the knowledge starts to decline because, in effect, they've stopped learning and they think they know it all. CEOs, interesting enough, with all due respect to Charlie, I'm sure is an outlier in this respect, CEOs peak at 5.7 years. You know? And the reason why they peak is so interesting is because, in effect, they arrive open to listening to lots of people from lots of different sources, going to customers, going to people who wouldn't normally talk to them. And then after a while, they just get used to their loyal lieutenants being the proxy for giving them information. Therefore, they have less good information, they make less good decisions, and they become less effective. So we can see very clearly. Learning is also, there are very few racing certainties when it comes to happiness. There are, in psychological terms, very few racing certainties. One of them is listening to music you like. One of them is spending time with people that make you feel good. But another is learning. So you think, well, this learning thing is really good for us on a social basis. It's really good for us on a career basis. Those doctors or CEOs who want to be outliers, who want to last longer, want to be ready for the future, need to keep learning. And yet we have this slight aversion to learning. And when cable TV was starting and they were going to launch the Learning Channel, and the Learning Channel completely bombed in research. And then they renamed it the Discovery Channel, and we know the results that was. So there's ways of framing and discussing and shaping learning, and we talk about turning people into learnatics. And a learnatic is someone who knows what to do when they don't know what to do. And therefore, I think the more we can create this appetite for learning and this acuity for discovery and curiosity, that's the best way we set people up for success in the future.
Thank you so much. I mean, that's really interesting, given not only what employers need and us expressing that they need from their workforce, but also, and I'm not totally sure how this fits yet with what you said, that employees are now reporting, 1 in 5 reporting that sort of learning and development is the most important thing that they see in their work. And yet only 2 in 5 people are actually taking up learning in the UK. So how do we kind of bring this together? How do we marry this disconnect? How can technology understand that better and then help map skills and capabilities and development paths in a way that may address this mismatch?
Charlie, I think before you even get to technology, I mean, what Octavius has revealed the secret here. Learning needs a better marketing program.
Yeah.
And if we told everyone in the world they could become a learnatic, there would be no problem. Should have been the lunatic.
No, I think the
branding for one.
Totally resonates. I mean, when and we've spoken, as you have, Octavius, no doubt, to lots of large organizations about this topic, and there's no question people really value. They want to enrich themselves, they want to better themselves. But I think the stat from one organization, big multinational, who pride themselves on this, is that less than 30% of people had ever registered for their learning platforms, and of those that did, it's typically they'll engage with it twice a year, right? So this is not something that's become a habit of a monthly habit, a weekly, let alone when you think of social media, something that might be a daily or multiple times a day habit. And the label might be one part of it. It feels like homework maybe, versus something that's exciting. But I think the delivery, how we get learning to people, I know you've been doing a lot of thinking about this.
I'll give you an example,
Yeah.
if I may, outside of the world of work. And you mentioned the work we do in MindGym. So parenting is a really interesting area from a psychological perspective, because the single factor that most determines someone's life chances outside where and when they were born is the quality of parenting that they have. And by and large, politicians do not want to touch this. And I'm going to paraphrase terribly, I'm embarrassed this is being recorded, but nonetheless, the ones on the right don't want a nanny state, and the ones on the left don't want to label poor parents as feckless parents. So basically they remove themselves completely from this issue, or largely, which is a fantastic opportunity for psychologists. So we get in there, and we set up 10 years ago a parenting program that's specifically directed at people who had at the lower levels of the socioeconomic group in the UK. By and large, who had a poor experience of learning at school, and by and large who left school at the first available opportunity. And what we found is that by taking them in cohorts, little or not, we frame it as for parents who care, so it's MindGym for parents who care. So it gets the identity issue. You know, I want to be a parent who cares. That's kind of me, so it's not like a problem parent or a difficulty parent. I just want to be a good enough parent. And then we run it in bite-sized sessions in the school when they drop their kids off, so it's really easy to do. It creates a community. It's got really practical work to do, like how to organise a treasure hunt or how to have one-to-one time with each child. And when they come back the next week and they go on a scale of 1 to 10, they say, how much effort did you put in? And if they score 7 or above, they tell the story of what happened. And it might have been a disaster. You know, we were going to have a treasure hunt. I put the clues outside. They got stolen, or it rained, or whatever. You know, also. But then someone said, "Oh, yeah, I had the same problem. I knocked on the neighbour's door, and they said, actually, why don't you come in? I think our kids are about the same age, and we could do the treasure hunt across both flats and stuff like that." And it continues to create a cumulative learning. So the research shows that appealing to self-interest to begin with, parents who care, making it bite-sized little and often, practicing in between, and then producing cohorts that then share each other's experiences is a really powerful way. And we've now had 5 universities evaluate the program, and not only does it improve parenting self-efficacy and childhood outcomes, but it improves well-being and mental health outcomes. So this can be done, however tricky it is. And I've probably gone way long enough on that.
No, not at all. So applying that thinking to the workforce and thinking about bringing into this discussion or the entirety of the workforce, and not those that are higher skilled and most easy to access. How are we doing? How are we doing, Jeffrey?
Well, I'm not sure I can give a precise answer to that, but what Octavius is saying is fascinating, and maybe it's only half a joke that this is about a lack of a marketing program or a more innovative delivery program for learning. I mean, I'm just reflecting on the fact that in the U.S., I think last year's statistics were that U.S. industry spent $185 billion on workforce training, and that's everybody. That's not just knowledge workers. That's the entire economy. That comes out to about $1,200 per capita. And you think about that, I mean, you can go to McKinsey and Goldman Sachs and they'll invest $12,000 to $15,000 in an employee. But the point is, average $1,200. And then the question is, for me, a real conundrum. On one hand, totally agree with what you said, which is when you ask people what makes them loyal to a given job or employer, they will tell you, if they're investing in me, I feel more loyal to them. Yeah. At the same time, we spend megabucks across the ocean doing this, and yet, as Charlie says, get very little uptake. And so it makes me think that part of the issue here is, do digital platforms give us an opportunity to, in a sense, invite the corporate sector to think the way Octavius is thinking, which is, you know, is there a better way to deliver this thing we call learning in the workplace? We know the individuals value it. We know the learning and development budgets exist. So then the question is, where's the failure point if we're not getting more uptake and impact? And clearly, a lot of this stuff is like watching paint dry.
Yeah. It's interesting that new research shows that big businesses are actually spending less on training and learning now than they were, for example, a few years ago, in spite of the fact that needs are becoming sharper and these disconnects becoming more pronounced. So I feel like stopping at that point and stepping back a bit and perhaps thinking about a check-in and a reminder, perhaps you, Charlie, that what is the best business case as well as the social and the moral one for reskilling for taking your entire workforce with you, as we've been talking about?
Yeah, I mean, look, we've been very involved in the conversation. Actually, the year before we did the first CogX, we did a dinner on this once a week for the entire year. So we did 50 kind of small and medium-sized roundtables and then we did the event. So there's been kind of 7 years of research almost. And because we started in AI, the question people were trying to get their heads around is how's data and analytics going to affect my sector, my market, and how do I need to change my organization to do that? And that's only just one area of learning, right? I mean, there's so many different areas. And it took people a long time to even work out what the org structure looks like. And then they worked out, okay, which parts of their company could benefit in the short term versus the medium versus the long term. And then after all of that, they went out to the market to recruit these people and realized they couldn't recruit them without paying an extremely high price and competing with obviously the big tech companies who are, gobbling up a lot of the talent. And then startups. So if you like, traditional established companies were really left in a difficult position. And they've had to work very, very hard to create the right environment and the messages as to what they're going to do. And one of the big advantages actually they have in data is they have a huge amount of data, which is very appealing if you want to work in that space. But they, if I was just to take that one area, and it's only one area as an example, they've all accepted at this point, I would say, that they're going to have to reskill their current employees and inspire them to think that this is the next step for their career, not for everybody, and that they should take the time to do it. And so that's one part of the process, and create the right environment for it, rather than go to the market and hire it, because the skills just aren't there. And God knows how many times the government obviously wants to create initiatives to create more skills in the marketplace. You just can't do it fast enough. So I think that's where the need ultimately comes from. And yes, you might bring in one person who's, comes to the table as an absolute domain expert in that. But the other challenge is it's not just one, right? There's so many different skills. I mean, data science is a great example where you need the business leaders to have some knowledge, you need the product manager to have some knowledge, you need data scientists, data engineers, and so on to actually make it work. So I think the need is enormous, actually, and it is very surprising to hear your stat, by the way, that investment is reducing, and that actually in Jack's session yesterday about quantum, where he's saying, don't think we're waiting for quantum computers because they're way off. There's applications of quantum that are happening now that means actually we've only just got our heads around data science. His advice is everybody now this year needs to start planning for how they get business managers and product people and so on to start thinking about the implications of quantum. And just to drop in one example, cryptography, and the ability to think you've got encrypted content is going to be at risk in the very near future. And how does that change? You've got to audit your whole organization and work out what you're going to have to change on that basis. So there's waves of this technology innovation taking place that are going to have to create new skills need to be embedded across our organizations. And you just can't hire that talent. We're not producing the talent with those skills fast enough.
That's a good place to bring in Sara, and back to what's the business case for carrying out the audits, not just on our quality, but the wider impacts that we are that we're talking about.
So in the field of AI ethics, so first of all, maybe this is not something that most people know, but it's incredibly new. I would say that until maybe the first papers about it in literature started emerging maybe 8 to 10 years ago, and at the first big conference in the field was 4 years ago. So everything is extremely new. There are new jobs and new skills that are emerging right now. Something that is also reminds me of what Jeffrey was saying earlier is that it really feels like there is a need for interdisciplinarity that wasn't there before. And you were saying we just wrapped our heads around the data science, and I'm not so sure we have, to be honest, in the sense
around what's needed.
Yes.
Around what's needed. The implementation.
Yes.
We're still at the beginnings for sure.
And also about how there is this whole space of what does it mean for companies and for societies now that we're integrating all of this technology. And I think that's a new way of thinking about technology. I'm an engineer by background. I studied mathematics and then in computer science. And I was not taught at any point what are the possible risks of AI, to think even in terms of how are we applying this technology? What are we doing with this? It's extremely, my training was extremely technical. So it was okay, what's the best way to get this algorithm to perform? How can I reduce the error? But there is not this element of thinking in a bit of a broader perspective. And what I'm really seeing, for instance, talking about new skills, is the need for training for people to like really think in both these ways. In a technical way, there is a need to like really understand the technology itself for policy people, and then for data scientists, there is a need to try and think in terms of like, how do we apply these technologies? What are we doing with this? Is it safe? Are there other, even like very technical skills, like are there other measurements that I can take into account? Can I measure whether it's a fair system, right? If we're doing, we can measure the bias of the system, but that's not something that most people know how to do. And we're seeing even the companies that approach us for like bias audits or for AI assurance, they're asking us for training. So they're very hungry for it, actually, in our personal experience. They're like, please teach us how to do this ourselves as well.
Which mirrors what we've said about the need for both digital and other human skills, and to really, for the best results, to marry the two and unlock, so that they unlock each other. Is that a good moment to open up questions?
I think
to the audience.
Do we have a microphone?
And while
Here we go.
Hello.
Yeah.
What a fascinating discussion.
Could you introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Sophia, and I run a company called Tech for Non-Techies. So we literally educate non-technical professionals how to work with people like you. So how to work with data scientists and developers, and how to work with tech teams. Actually, my MBA is from Chicago Booth. So my question is for you, Professor. What are you doing at Harvard to bring the two schools together? Because what I'm seeing in education and also in corporates is that you have these two camps, and I'm fighting at Tech for Non-Techies to bring them together, but it's a really hard job, so I would love to learn how Harvard is doing it.
We're going to take 3 questions at a time, and then everyone can pick the one they like. Thank you so much. Excellent question.
There's one up here on the right.
Hi, I'm Cav Patel. I'm the CPO at a data infrastructure company called Yonder. This question is probably a little bit more for Jeffrey and Octavius than it is for the rest of you. I completely agree that learning is probably the key skill to getting through a lot of this. But there was a journalist who coined the phrase, added on to a previous sort of quote, there's 3 certainties in life: death, taxes, and change. And that change is the only certainty that we know in the workplace that will keep going. How do we get people comfortable with the discomfort of change? Some people are more inclined to it, some people are less inclined to it. A lot of the processes I've seen, learnings I've seen, are about exposure therapy, but a lot of the evidence I've seen on that is that allows people to cope with it, not necessarily excel through it. So from both of your experiences, how do we get people to excel through periods of change or unlimited change as it's coming down the line?
I can't thank the lady in the green dress.
Fascinating. So my name is Abigail Barnes. I focus on productivity and well-being, bringing those two disciplines together. So my question is really around how you deal with talent, right? So the talent's 3 questions in their head is, what are you going to do for me? What are you going to do for my career development? And why should I share my skill set with your organization? So what is the purpose of your organization? So I love that we're talking about the future of work and all of the different angles, but I'm coming at it from the person who is saying, why should I work for you? Why should I work for you now? And what are you going to do for me? So, yeah.
So 3 fantastic questions, uniting together different schools, enabling adaptability, and thinking about the purpose of companies. Octavius, which one would you like to take?
I'm definitely not equipped to answer question 1, but I'd love to look at questions 2 and 3, if that's all right with you. I mean, I think the thing about change and constant change is you're absolutely right, it is there. The interesting question, we think we don't have enough time, but who would like to make a guess as when the first book was written about not having enough time? Anyone want to volunteer a suggestion? The first book ever written? Did I see a hand raised there? If you know, I thought about taking a Picasso. What do you think? You think in the 1800s? There's a
gentleman over here as well. We've got another.
Seneca, on a short life, bullseye, spot on. So at the time, ancient Rome, people thought they didn't have enough time. So we might blame it on our Samsung Galaxy devices or whatever else we use, but one thing's for sure, this is a phenomenon that is part of the human condition. So the idea of constant change has been around forever. Now, there are some domains of our lives where constant change is what we expect. We'd be worried if it wasn't the case. Now, some of you, maybe like me, be a parent, and if your child is not changing, you'd be quite worried. You said, oh my God, my child's exactly the same now as they were 6 months ago. This is a disaster, I better go and see a doctor. So you're constantly looking for change. You think change is something to cherish. So what we have to do is to help people reframe their love of change in certain fields to the world of work. And talk about the excitement, and that's where the curiosity and the learning comes in. So we make this a strength rather than a something to navigate. And for those of you who were brave or bold enough to come to the talk I gave this morning, really the future of leadership is all about tensions. And instead of trying to resolve tensions, to actually embrace them. As I said this morning, a bicycle without tension is a lump of metal on the ground. And therefore we think about change, continuous change, as the driving force that takes things forward, that delivers progress in the world and in our lives. So that would be my way of helping people think differently about change. On the talent question, I think it's incredibly important that people feel that that my work matters. There's a really interesting study by one of my favourite behavioural economists. I'm geeky enough to have a favourite behavioural economist, and it's Dan Ariely. And he did a great study where he got people to make Lego figurines. They give them, instead of Lego, and you make a Lego figurine, one of those machines that fired at something at somebody, or whatever it was. Anyway, they got $3 for the first one, and $2.80 for the next, and $2.60 and $2.40. And one group would make the Lego figurine and be put on the table, and they'd be given a new set of Lego bricks in order to create a second one. And then do that one on the table, you get another set, the same set, identical bricks, but not the actual same bricks. In the second group, the Lego figurine they created was disassembled in front of them, and they were given back the bricks to rebuild the figurine. And what happened is the first group kept going for far longer, and there was a strong correlation between their persistence and doing the work and their love of Lego. The second group stopped much sooner, and basically the correlation between love and Lego and keeping going didn't occur. And the reason for that is I can see the value of my work. My work feels worthwhile. So purpose on a macro level is really important, but purpose on a micro level too.
It's been such a rich discussion that I've lost track of the time and being told to wrap up. So we're going to have to go for perhaps 1 minute wrap-up point in response to your question, Jeffrey, but I do encourage you to think about the first one.
Oh, all right. Sophie, let me give you a direct answer to the first one. So we teach entrepreneurship, and needless to say, 99% of entrepreneurship at a place like Harvard Business School is technology-based. So we have these students who need to either learn about technology or find somebody who can bring technology in terms of bringing, if that's what you mean about bringing two schools of thought together. And so for years, I would counsel students when they came in and said, I have a startup, a great venture, I need a tech co-founder. And I would say, you know, there's this little school, it is called MIT. And it's just a couple miles down the road. You just get on the tube and it's like one stop. Nobody would ever go to MIT, such as the aura of the Harvard University ecosystem. So we solved the problem, which was to take our entire school of engineering and applied sciences and airlift it from one side of the Charles River in Harvard Square over to put it contiguous to the HBS campus. It helped to have a gift from a hedge fund manager. $400 million allows you to build a brand new facility. But now we have literally done it the old-fashioned way, which is put business and technology, or business and engineering, side by side, with a road in between, with a traffic cop to make sure nobody gets hurt if they cross the street, and to encourage this kind of integration and confluence. So it's a crazily sort of old-school way to solve a problem. But school plus school is going to equal this kind of integration.
Yeah. Physical co-location.
Yeah, can you believe it? Yes.
Moving the school.
Yeah, I think Seneca knew something about that. So it takes us all the way back to ancient times.
Sara.
Actually, makes me think of our company. So the two founders are actually Adriano Koshiyama is an engineer by the training, and Emre Kazim is a philosopher by training. So it's quite interesting, right? Because in AI ethics, you can see he's an ethicist. He did his PhD on Kant, and so it's quite interesting. I feel like it's really at the base of our company, and that's why I'm very passionate about bringing things together as well. I think it's. And in this specific sector, I feel there is a lot of interest for it, actually. I haven't found that it's difficult. I feel that I get a lot of people that need this translation, basically. So from policy to data science language, and from technical language to policy and governance.
Yeah. Thank you. And finally, Charlie.
I think Our perspective on it's very simple, which is how do you, whatever you think of learning as, and I think labeling that differently and so on is probably a really important conversation for us to continue another time. But whatever it is, we need to find a way for this to become a light touch, high frequency thing that we do all the time, and that is hopefully, if it's personalized to you and it fits you and it fits the time of day you want to do it and where you want to do it, that it isn't seen as a chore and it's something that can accumulate. And instead of you getting distracted and going down a rabbit hole on a social media app, that you might end up going down a longer learning path because you found it really exciting and it took you there. So I think whatever we do to encourage more platforms and more opportunities for it to be a continuous process, as you mentioned, Octavius, dropping in little snacks, I think that's great. And I think there is a bigger conversation about all the other platforms that we have which distract us to things that are not learning. And maybe you call them the new form of entertainment. But I think that also needs to be talked about. And I know there's obviously been a huge discourse about things like Twitter and freedom of speech and town hall, which is a session we should plan for another CogX.
It certainly is. Yeah.
I just want to say, Anna, thank you so much for chairing this panel.
It's been a great privilege and pleasure to host the discussion. We've made significant progress in thinking about how to prepare our workforce, but we also know the scale of the task and the work to come. And with that, thank you all.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anna, our panel, thank you very much. We're going to have